Good morning. So, last time we were here, we were working out some UI elements, and we have a button. It looks like a button. It's not clickable. That's what we're going to do to work on today, is actually getting this button to be responsive. And then we have a couple more UI elements I'm hoping to create before we begin working on implementing the game world. So here we go. We come back into our main file here. There is a label UI element and a button UI element. And when we're rendering the button, let's see. First we render the left side of the button, and then we render the button text, and then we render the right side of the button. We need to know if the mouse is hovering over the button. And it's like if it's hovering over the button, we'll change the background color to indicate that it has the attention of the mouse. So how are we going to do that? We are able to tell when the mouse is hovering over a tile. We're doing that for the player. If we, let's see where we're handling that. There was a mouse move event, mouse down. Let's see, on mouse down, there you go. The sprite has a player, bounds contains, and then you pass in the mouse position. So we need that bounds, that rectangle object on our UI element. And I kind of want to put it on the root element, the root type, the UI element. Because every type of UI element should have a bounding rectangle. Yeah, I can remember that I'm hiding these types inside of these namespaces now, which I currently still think is a good idea. Okay, making sure the tile set was properly referenced. So if we're going to pass the bounding box for a UI element into the base constructor, then we need to handle that here. When we call the super, that function call right there, we'll call the constructor on the base type UI element. So that needs to have the position, the width, and the height. And we have to adjust the label UI element and the button UI element to account for this. Which should not take too long. I wonder if JavaScript has any rules about the super constructor being called first. Let's find out. Now we can just do it like this. The height is equal to font, tile set, height. height. Oh, tile set is private, so we cannot access the font's tile set, which I'd like to leave it that way. So instead, we're going to create an accessor, get width. It means it'll treat width like a property, but it's actually calling a function that's going to grab the private tile set and then grab the width property off of that. Do the same thing for the height. Then the width of the font multiplied by the length of the text will give us the complete width of the text. And then we can do something similar down here for our button. Tile set, because the width of a button is the same as the full text length plus the tile set's tile width times 2 for the 2 end caps of the button. Modify the X and Y to use the bounding box. Some of these lines are getting a little bit long. Way to handle that is something like this, where you just split out the parameters by line, and that can make it easier to read. So that looks right, but is it right? Force reload, and still works. So now what we got to do is these UI elements need to be able to respond directly to the events, keyboard events, mouse events. Just gotta figure out how we want to do that. One of the things is I'm gonna make the button background gray. Ooh, all of it, please. Excuse me. Let's try that. Oh no, I'm gonna keep playing with it. Eventually I'll have a button that I like. It's a little more visible having it gray. So how are we going to do this? I think we're going to go into our on mouse move, and we need to look at each of the UI elements. Like that, but well, almost like that. They're not moving the mouse cursor. But if we are iterating over all of our UI elements, and as the index into the UI elements array, going over the entire length of the array, grab the UI element. If the bounding box contains the mouse position, then we're going to give the UI element its own onMouseMove event. So this will go up here. And oh, how do I want to do this? Problem is, onMouseMove can say that, well, this house mouse hover equals true, and that's accurate, but when does it get toggled to false? You would have to iterate through all of our UI elements and set all of them to false, and then have it reset it to true for the element that has a mouse hover on the current frame. What I'd rather do, I cannot remember if I can set a static variable here. I don't think I can. Can I? Let's say that we have a mouse hover static variable. Like there can only be one UI element that has, well, I don't really like that either. No, only one element should be allowed to have the mouse hover set. We're going to do it like this. One element can, the mouse can be hovering over one UI element, and each of the UI elements will have this has mouse hover getter that looks back at the static field, static property. If it's set to the current element, then it returns true. That should be available to all of our UI elements now because it's in the base type. So in our update, if this element has the mouse hover, I want it to be a brighter color if the mouse is hovering over the button. And I'll revert back to the darker color if the mouse is not hovering over the button. And let's see if that works. Nah, something broke. What'd I break? Cannot set property has mouse hover, which only has a getter. Oh, right. That makes sense. We need to not set it there. Done. And another thing, we need to reset this before we begin checking our elements, because there's some chance that no element will have the mouse hover. Alright, and that doesn't appear to be doing anything. But why? Why aren't you doing anything? Let's make sure the update's actually being called. Okay, let's see what kind of feedback we get. Looks like the mouse hover thing is just not working. Like, it's never getting into that thing. But why? Why? Alright, let me think. It's the same type of thing we're doing here. Client X and client Y refer to the position of the mouse. Let's dump the bounds of the UI element and the mouse position to the console, and we'll see what it looks like. Ooh, look over there. It says the width is not a number and the height is undefined. So that's messed up. We'll disable this comment and add it to the constructor of the button so we can diagnose why the bounding box is not being calculated correctly. Not a number and undefined. Why is this not a number? I'm breaking down this equation right here into its little components. We're going to dump out the font width, the text length, and the tile set's tile width. And looks like that third number is undefined. Third number is the font width, which is defined from the tile set width. Tile set doesn't have a width property. It has a tile width properly. Okay. Well, let's try that, shall we? Okay. Force reload and... oh, look at that. Got the right math, and now the thing is taking the mouse hover correctly, and that is cool. It's still not clickable. In fact, it's still not really a button if you can't click it. Remove these debug statements, and the clickable bit will be handled in the on mouse down. And a mouse, when you press down on a button, that button will then have the mouse's focus until you release the mouse button. And when you're clicking, it only really matters which element the mouse is hovering over. So we'll do it like that. If the mouse hover is defined, we'll call the on mouse down event for that element. Another getter that will tell us if this element has the mouse focus. And down here, if this has mouse focus, we want to make the button darker. Let's see if that works. Oh, syntax error, line 44. That makes sense, there shouldn't be an equal sign there. Interesting. Oh, well, it goes down, but it never comes back up. Because we're not responding to a mouse up event. Let's take care of that. Mouse up will only occur on the focused UI element. Reset. If you release the mouse button, set the mouse focus back to undefined, and see what that looks like. Oh, look at that. The button is clickable, and you click down on it, the button goes down, you can move the mouse around. The button still has focus, so it still looks like it's down. Release the mouse button, and the button pops back up. Now we just need it to actually do something. So we're going to override the mouse event in our button class. Case, going to give it an on-click handler. How do we want to handle on-click? Let's say that it's just going to be a property that we can store a function in. There's other ways to do this. You can actually create like custom JavaScript events on classes. But we're going to stick with this for now. Modify how we're creating our button a little bit. So we have our button on click. Whenever you click the button, we're going to log something in the console. It says clicked, just so we know that the button responded. So let's try it out. And onClick is not defined. I mean, it's not defined. Oh. You cannot simply call onClick. You have to call this.onClick. Because this refers to like this instance of this type. Reload. Oh, this is exciting. Huh. Of course, now it's not releasing the mouse hover because we need to call super on mouse up. There we go. And we're going to do one more thing here. We're going to make a little counter. I'm not really sure to put this there. Maybe up here. We're going to have to organize this soon. Okay, let's create another UI element. And it's going to spit out the value of our counter. using the string interpolation to make sure, like we wrap this in the function that returns a string that uses string interpolation to dump the value of the counter into the text so that the label should automatically update with the current value of the counter when it is rendered. Then, instead of dumping to the console, we will increment our counter. And actually, I want to make 2 buttons. One for up and one for down. Scoot it over on the x-axis, get it out of the way. And inspect. I have up and down buttons, and there you go. We can knock our counter up, knock it back down. And if I don't know where I'm going with that if. I've gone through so many tutorials on web development, and a lot of them when it's talking about sharing state or storing state across the life of your app, one of the first things they'll do is have you develop a counter app that just tracks a counter. Of course, the way those apps work, it uses local storage. Local storage is sort of a memory inside of the web browser. And if we're doing that, you can actually access that from here. Local storage is just it's a collection of key value pairs. It stores strings. We can pull the counter value out. If it doesn't exist, then return a 0, and then make sure we parse that into an integer. And then increment the counter and stick it back in. Like that. Do the same for the down button. And then we can take this whole getter and shove it in there. Well, let's make a function that'll get the counter value. Okay, so that should still work. And if you go into the local storage settings, there's our counter right there, being stored inside the browser. And the nice thing about that, let's kill this process, restart it. It saves the value from our last run. It is a super simple way of storing the state of your game. Throw it all in local storage. It's not good for everything, but it's kind of neat that we can access that since we're working in Electron, browser-based desktop app. So I'm going to leave it at that for today. Next time we're going to implement the progress. There's a couple of meters we need to be able to stick at the bottom of the screen to track the player's health and stamina. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.